This is the Nielsen Norman Group UX podcast. I'm Therese Fessenden. Before we dive in, I wanted to share a quick word about our live online courses, in which I and other experienced design and research experts share what we've learned over the years. Whether you're job hunting, trying to reskill in a tough market, or just trying to brush up a bit, our live online courses might be able to help. We've got beginner-friendly sessions like UX Basic Training, hands-on focused sessions like Accelerating Research with AI, and manager-focused sessions like Design Operations. Regardless what you're focusing on, see what's coming up at nngroup.com/courses or click the link in the show notes. Now, if you've been anywhere near the UX LinkedIn universe in the last few years, then you've probably come across a post by Hang Zhu. Hang is one of the most followed design recruiters on the platform, known for his candid insights into the hiring process, along with a healthy dose of dry humor and the occasional hot take. But Hang didn't start in recruiting. He actually began his career as a UX designer and made the pivot into recruiting after years of firsthand experience navigating the challenges of the design world. That background gives him a unique perspective, one that's equal parts empathetic and brutally honest. In this episode, Hang and I talk about some of the biggest misconceptions that designers and researchers have when they're applying for roles, why resumes might be getting rejected within minutes, and what hiring managers actually mean when they say that they're looking for someone that has craft. We also touch on Hang's latest project, an ambitious personal experiment to land a top-tier design role within 6 months. More on that later. So whether you're actively job hunting, considering a career pivot, or just wondering what's going on within the hiring landscape in UX, this conversation might be the reality check that you didn't realize you needed. Without further delay, here's Hang. Hi, Hang. Welcome to our show. I'm so excited to have you here with us today. I feel like I'm talking to a famous person, so it's really exciting to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for asking. And I'm not famous at all, but I'm very flattered. Thank you.
I mean, you say you're not famous, but you're probably the most followed design recruiter that I know about. And it's really been amazing hearing your takes and also just learning so much about what it takes to get a role in design. And if people haven't heard of you, if our listeners haven't heard of you before, I strongly encourage you to check out Hang's work, and especially his posts on LinkedIn. Some people here listening may already know you and know your name, but what's interesting about your story is people know you as a design recruiter, but you haven't always been a design recruiter. So could you share a little bit about your mysterious past as a designer?
Yeah, so prior to becoming a design recruiter about 3 years ago, I was working as a product or UX designer, and I had been doing it for about 10 years or so. So when I had been fired from my last job, I moved into recruiting because I felt like it was an area that I had a lot of issues with, and I was very naive and thought maybe I could change things or fix things without realizing why they are the way they are because of the systems underneath it. So a lot of similarities to the challenges that we face in UX as well. Prior to becoming a product designer, I also worked as a museum assistant or artist assistant and photographer. So I, did a lot of different stuff before I went into tech.
And I feel like the work that you post and share, and I know you're being modest at the moment, but you have been brutally honest with sharing what you just said, like how much of the system is a bit broken and how there are certain things that hiring managers are looking for, certain things that candidates are doing in their best effort to get hired. But I know you've also mentioned a lot about how design recruiters nowadays are focusing a lot on craft. And I would love for you to share your thoughts on how even the word craft, what does that even mean? And what does it mean from, the hiring manager side, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the two terms that I hear most often from recruiters and hiring managers would be craft and taste. And they are, I wouldn't say they're necessarily complex terms, but it does feel like, depending on who you ask, their definition is different. So I would say it's a very subjective thing, right? Not only in terms of the definition, but also how they evaluate it and what they consider to be good versus bad. So let's talk a bit about craft, because I feel that if you were to ask a designer what craft means, it changes depending on when they entered the workforce or when they became a designer. And if you were to ask a recruiter or hiring manager, that's different as well. So I can give you a wide range of definitions. I've heard from, I don't want to say older designers, but designers from a certain era might consider craft more like how a carpenter would design things, like the things that are invisible, the things that you don't see. So something that you would read in Steve Jobs' biography, where he talks about, carpentry and cabinet and paying attention to the things that most users or customers would never ever see, right? That kind of effort and energy put into it is a definition of craft. And then it feels like with newer designers, it has more to do with visual impressiveness. And I don't just say visual design quality, but the extra emphasis and effort put into it in a detailed sense that goes far and beyond what is typically asked of a designer. And one analogy I often use is the difference between a 1 Michelin star restaurant versus a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And I, having gone to both, haven't been lucky enough to.
It's like, you've been to a 3-star Michelin restaurant.
I have, and wow. It was very, very expensive. It was definitely like a special occasion kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I noticed was it felt like the food between the 1 and 3-star Michelin restaurant really wasn't that different, right? Like obviously I'm not an expert in this. I'm not a chef. And while I enjoy food, I wouldn't say I'm in the top 5% in terms of understanding taste and the techniques and effort that goes into making something, right? Like I'm an amateur home chef at best. And I would say that the big difference between the 1 and 3-star Michelin restaurant isn't actually in the food itself, but in the attention to detail that the 3 Michelin star restaurant puts into everything, their restroom, the way they greet you, the way they plan for everything. And not that the 1-star Michelin restaurant doesn't do so, but I do feel like there's a gap between that. And if you watch the Hulu TV show The Bear, you start to notice the things that they do, where I guess they kind of stalk their customers, their diners beforehand to understand their background and what they need and how to customize the experience for them. And that kind of extra effort is what sets them apart. So to go back to how designers treat it, I do feel that if you're really craft oriented and you're like top of the level for craft, the newer designers might think about it in terms of putting so much energy and effort into something that if you were a PM or a less experienced or discerning designer, you wouldn't put that effort into, right? It's something that is so pixel perfect, that is so, so much attention to the detail that a user would be flabbergasted. Like, wow, this is just way above and beyond what I would expect from this experience. And that's another definition, in my opinion. And I think when you talk to recruiters, then it's a little bit different as well. They might think more about visual design, taste or style, something that is the newest or maybe something that's really different and unique. And that's more to do with, I would say, visual style and taste as opposed to emphasis on attention to detail. So I'm not, I'm generalizing quite a bit here, but I'm just giving a wide range of how people have different definitions of craft that I've heard in recent months.
Yeah. So on the topic of like differences, it's funny when you mentioned it's older designers, I was like, feeling old, feeling like I've been here. I mean, I definitely got into the field when like Photoshop was the best way to have layers in an interface. So when it comes to, how the industry has changed, obviously there's new tools, there's a lot of, like you're saying, AI has also changed the way that we can quickly create some sort of concepts and test them out. And so I do think the standard for taste, craft, polish, whatever you may want to call it, the end output is certainly elevated. And maybe that's a good thing that the standard is higher. But it does kind of strike me that maybe this mismatch in definitions is part of the reason why it can often be difficult to get a foot in the door when applying for a role. And so I'd love your thoughts too on, what would you say that hiring managers and recruiters are looking for that maybe candidates don't even realize that they're missing or they're not communicating properly? Because this is something I hear a lot where someone's like, I've been applying for months now and I can't even get my resume looked at. But when I do get it looked at, I don't have feedback and I don't know why I'm, not qualifying or why I'm not getting any sort of callbacks or interviews. So I know that's sort of, again, we're generalizing here, and I'm sure everyone's resume is a little bit different, but are there any patterns you're noticing in what a recruiter or hiring manager may look for versus, maybe what candidates are putting out there and trying to get noticed?
I probably should dive a little bit deeper into the term older designer because that's a touchy term right now, considering the ageism in tech that is very prevalent and obvious. I don't necessarily mean in terms of the age old, but I would say when you enter the design field matters a lot because design is very cultural. And if you enter design in the era when Steve Jobs' biography came out, that was the rage and everybody talked about it. And that changed the definition of what good design was. And nowadays, it feels like we've lost that luster that Apple once had, Steve Jobs once had. And nowadays, people are looking up to founders a little bit more. So Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 book is more often, quoted from or referenced than Steve Jobs' biography was, I would say, at this point. So it very much matters when you enter the field because that kind of creates a foundation of your beliefs as a designer, your taste, your ideas. And I do think that there's a difference between if you were to enter design, say 10, 15 years ago versus in the last 5 years, your idea of what good design is could be quite different. So that's what I mean by older as opposed to your age. It's more when you enter the field. But going back to your question, I think that's a really great question. And I didn't really realize it until I went into recruiting, just how many mistakes that I was making as a designer. So, often designers should be very empathetic people who understands the needs of the users, but for whatever reason, I and many other designers, I would say the vast majority, and the average designer does a very poor job of understanding what hiring managers, what employers, what recruiters need from them. And instead, they treat everybody else the same. Like the person looking at it is a designer, and that is not the case at all. Oftentimes, you're being evaluated by a recruiter who's never done design before, by a hiring manager who might be a PM or a founder who's never even worked with design before. And you don't really understand their needs, their goals, and you're trying to shove down their throat what your belief system is. And like I said earlier, the belief systems have been changing quite quickly in the last few years. And we need to be more cognizant of that change and understanding what people are looking for. So it's an issue. I would say most designers don't really understand what the current hiring market is looking for from design. And instead they're trying to force upon it their beliefs of what good design is. And I think there could be a point to be made about why good design from 5 years ago could be better than good design now, because we have a more of an emphasis on speed, on delivery, on output, on building than ever before, and much less emphasis on user research. And I'm sure if you are a research-oriented or strategy-oriented designer like I am, you could make very cogent points about that. But at the end of the day, while you might be right, it could be very difficult to convince a hiring manager or a recruiter during a call that you are right about something, because ultimately that is not what they're looking for. They're not looking for a lesson or a quick course on what design is. They're trying to solve their own problems. So you really need to figure out who your audience is and when the right moment is to talk about something like that. And more importantly, when to give up on your closely held beliefs. It's not really about right or wrong. Sometimes it's more about, do you want to get a job in this company or on this team? And you have to make that decision. I don't think there's a right or wrong aspect to it. It's a very personal choice. And I don't know if many designers, and I'm including myself as well, are able to logically look at that and make the right choice for them.
You said something I think that's really important. And I think something that makes like just mass applying to as many designer or researcher, various UX roles as possible, right? It kind of makes that strategy null in a way, right? Because you mentioned solving a problem for a recruiter or a hiring manager, right? That they're seeking someone for a role for a particular purpose. And maybe it's a current project that they're working on. Maybe it's a particular skill set that they've been lacking. And being able to speak to that particular gap or that immediate need for an immediate solution does seem like a really crucial part. And like I've obviously heard the more traditional advice of tailor your job application to every role that you're applying to. But it almost sounds like we have to go even further than just the title of, oh, I'm applying for a product design role, or I'm applying for this, content strategist role, and to go a step further than that and say, this is what I notice your problem is. Like maybe even doing a little research on what problems they could potentially be facing. Obviously, there's only so much you can know with so many, behind the scenes strategies not necessarily published out there.
Yeah.
Like you don't always know something pre-launch, what they're currently building or working on. But it does sound like there's a little bit of investigation that we might need to do in order to actually get a true, in any form of airtime. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is a ton of advice out there from coaches, from recruiters, from people who are selling courses like Career Strategy Lab. And many of them are very expensive. And some of it is good, some of it is, I would argue, not really in line with the ROI that people are looking for in the current market. And one of the most common advice is you should tailor your resume, your portfolio to the job. And I think on the surface, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like you should cater to the needs of your individual users, but it's kind of ignoring the issue that you have a limited financial runway. It takes time to do a lot of these things. And if you were to cater to every single individual company, you might end up not getting very far ultimately, because they're going to be pulling you from every which direction. And if you look at your own candidacy as a product, you must have faced something similar when you're building or designing for something where you have multiple customers, multiple stakeholders, all wanting something slightly different. And you have to pick and choose a path or direction for you to take so you can focus your effort and get the highest ROI possible. So my opinion is you really need to understand your current position in the market, what the market is looking for, and then knowing exactly how much to change it by, so you're adapting to a greater number or a very specific target that you're trying to go for, as opposed to equally giving the same amount of time and effort and energy to every single company out there, because you will not get very far with that, right? Because it's just not enough time for each, but also not enough time for a main direction that you should be going for. So it's tough. It's knowing when to give up on a certain direction and when to double down on something.
I think that's a really helpful framing too, like the ROI of okay, I can tailor, but how much do I really want this job? If obviously there are some companies you might really want to work for, or specific types of roles where it's like, this truly is the best possible fit. I need to give this my best shot and can, portray my skills, portray my intent in the best possible way. But then, like you're saying, there's going to be hundreds of other jobs, and maybe we don't quite feel that same attachment or interest or alignment on other roles and responsibilities. But that actually got me thinking about ATS and how that's one of the common challenges I've also been seeing or hearing, is that a rejection happens within minutes of submitting, a resume, and the suspicion is that ATS scanned it and it was just an immediate no. There's been a lot of creative problem solving, I guess is the polite way to put it. Maybe some people call it application hacks and stuff. So what are your thoughts on that? Are there any job application hacks that are truly worth it? And I don't know if there's anything you could say or speak to about ATS. And I mean, on one hand, it almost feels futile because every organization is going to use ATS a little differently, but at the same time, it's real. And people do use these systems. So what can you say about that? I know it's a big question.
Sure. So for folks who are unaware, who don't know about ATS yet, ATS stands for Applicant Tracking System. So it's a layer of software that recruiters and sourcing talent folks use to keep track of candidates, to put out job applications, to hire people, to interview them, track them throughout the process. It's the tools that you would see like Workday or Greenhouse. I personally don't use an ATS in recruiting. I use an Airtable or Notion document because I'm perfectly fine with the database. I don't do the kind of volumes that a large company like Amazon would do. So it's not terribly useful for me, but I think most people have a misunderstanding of the ATS, not because they are ignorant or anything, but because the process itself is very much a black box. And an ATS like Workday it's humongous. It's a complex piece of software, and it has different size or interfaces, right? It has multiple types of users. There's a candidate, there's a recruiter who uses it, who controls it, and there's also the customer, typically somebody in the HR department who doesn't do the sourcing themselves, but they select the software they're using. And as many would complain about Workday being a piece of crap software, which is arguably true, you have to put your UX hat on again and think about how the reason why they're maybe not the best user experience is the fact that oftentimes it's being designed for the customer as opposed to the actual users. And even though the candidate is a user, they have the least amount of power in selecting the software because they have no choice but to use Workday if they want to apply to a company like Adobe, which exclusively uses Workday for their applicant tracking systems. Anyway, so people have I would say, erroneous idea of what it does, what it is, because many people think that it's a bot or it's an AI-powered software that decides who gets through the doors, who gets to the first round interview, and so on and so forth. Amy Miller from Amazon, she is one of the biggest recruiters out there in terms of having a large following, creating a ton of free content for candidates to read through, all of them available to folks. She's very transparent about things, and she's talked oftentimes about the misconceptions that people have about the ATS. And she calls it a filing cabinet. It's a digital filing cabinet that people keep information in. And what it does is it tracks the candidate when they apply for a job. So even if they've been rejected, that information is still stored in there because then recruiters can reference them later on, maybe a year or two later when they want to check back to see, well, Bob did really well during this interview a year ago. They came really close, and now there's positions open again. Maybe we should reach out to Bob, see how he's doing, if he's improved, he's progressed in his career. So it's keeping that data available. It's making it easier for recruiters to track it through the interview process from beginning to end. And then when they get an offer, it's easier for them to send out an offer to them. It's a single piece of software that is just very much a productivity tool more than anything else. So it's not making decisions about who to allowed through or not, with a few key exceptions. So there are something called knockout questions, and these knockout questions are very clear, very black and white. So for example, if this role is only for US citizens, if somebody applies from, say, Canada or Mexico or India, and they put in where their place of residence is, the ATS will automatically reject them because clearly they will never be able to, no matter how qualified they are, be able to work in this role because the company is not legally capable of employing them. There could be other questions as well around, do they have citizenship? Where do they live? Things like that. Things are very clear, drop-down menu selections. What it does not do is sometimes there's an EOS questionnaire asking people about their, military history. Are they a veteran? Their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, things like that. The ATS, while it tracks it, does not make that information available to the recruiter or the hiring manager in any way. That would be terrible and violate laws, I'm sure. That data is collected so that companies, I believe above 100 employees or so, are legally required to send that data to the ELC, which is like the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a government agency, I imagine. So it's a .gov, EEOC.gov. And that data is reported to the government so that they can keep track of employment data across the country and also make sure that companies are not being discriminatory in how they hire. So this is very much to help create diversity in the workforce as opposed to having hiring managers use it to make assumptions about the candidates or having the ATS do it. So it is not your enemy. Again, it is just a filing cabinet. It's a tool. Now, if a recruiter is problematic, they are biased against an individual for whatever dumb reason, of course they can use this tool to do that, to carry out their bias. But it is not the tool itself that's causing it. Now, if somebody were to be rejected very quickly afterwards, there could be multiple reasons. I can give you a list of reasons. One, it could be a knockout question because they live in the wrong state, the wrong country, that the company is not able to hire. It could be because the recruiter is actually looking at incoming candidates in real time, right? That's basically their job. So it would make sense that as they're looking at it, it's like, oh, this is not the right candidate. I'm going to reject them, turn them down. It could be because the role has already filled or they have more than enough candidates and they just haven't turned it up. Because again, these tools are not very well designed, not very well made. It's very convoluted. There are a lot of issues there. They are not cutting edge applications that we would use day to day. These are tools that are so as legacy as medical or finance, but it's getting there. It's close. If you were to ask any recruiter how much they like Workday, their answer is going to be on the negative side, most likely. They're only recently adding key features that they've been begging for years. So more often than not, it's a perfectly valid, logical reason. But at the end of the day, I just don't have visibility into why a single rejection happened. So I'm sure somebody will say, well, it happened so instantaneously, and I know I'm qualified for this role, I'm in the right place, whatever, so on and so forth. Without knowing the other side, it's really hard for me to guess why. But I can assure you these tools are not meant to be biased for whatever reason. They want to hire people.
I think that's all really helpful to know, especially the information about the equal opportunity questions, which I know that certainly crossed my mind because I know it says at the top that this isn't used in the hiring decision, but it's reassuring to know that this is collected but not necessarily shared to protect candidates. It's interesting to hear all of this, to think of it as a filing cabinet, because I know there's a lot of even people offering paid services of we'll make your resume ATS friendly. And
Oof.
is that snake oil? Is that
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, what is ATS friendly? Okay. Here's the barometer I use. and this is an issue that everybody has with Workday, which is you upload your resume and your resume has all the information it needs, where you work, when you work there, where you live, your phone number, your email, etc. And then Workday asks you, please fill out your phone number. Please fill out your work history.
Fill out your entire resume. Yep.
When I see that, I'm like, I like just, why did I upload my resume? Why are you doing this to me, right? And that comes down to how the ATS parses your resume. It's about how legible it is. And one issue that people face is they create their resume in Figma, which is a design tool. And while it looks really nice, it is not the same type of tool that people would use to create PDFs, which are more for reading, right? And what happens is oftentimes individual words or letters or phrases become its own layer. And with Figma, there's a z-axis in the design file itself, which talks about layers, and they're not linked. It's not the way people read something from top to bottom, left to right. It's very much like, this layer is on top of this other layer, on top of this other layer, and that's how they're related. And the ATS is not able to decipher that because, again, this is a design file. It is not a PDF that was created from a Word document or from Google Docs. So generally, I recommend people to create their resume in Google Docs, Microsoft Word, or some other text-based editing software so that it is legible. So when it's an ATS friendly, I'm putting up air quotes here around it, what that really means is when you upload your resume to Workday or another ATS, it automatically fills in the information to the right fields so that you do not have to manually type everything in. That is a time saver. So if I were to upload my resume to Workday and that resume is not really legible, it's not quote unquote ATS friendly, then I have to manually fill everything into the right fields. Now, if I were to do that, that might take me an extra 5 minutes, but the end result is that the ATS or Workday has my information, and I am now on equal footing with another candidate with an ATS-friendly resume because everything is in the right fields and it has all the information it needs. That ATS-friendly resume is not preferable to mine when it comes to the hiring decisions that are going to be made later on. With the exception if, they're more experienced or I'm more experienced. It's going to come down to merit as opposed to the quality of the resume itself. Having an ATS-friendly resume, or really, I would say a legible resume, means you save time each time you apply to a job. And that time saving is very, very valuable. But that is something that you can do entirely on your own. As a designer, as somebody who knows how to use Microsoft Word or Google Docs. So that term ATS friendly, I think, is a little scammy. It's a red flag to me if somebody talks about that. Some of the worst scams I've seen lately is when you apply to a job that seems pretty great on paper. They reach out to you afterwards quickly and they will say, hey, your experience looks great, but your resume is not ATS compliant. Please go to this third-party service that will make your resume compliant for a low fee of $30. And people are thinking, wow, I really should get this job. So let me just pay this $30, get my ATS compliant resume. But that job doesn't exist. That is a scam trying to push you toward buying a service that you don't actually need. Ultimately, now, if there are absolutely legitimate resume writers out there, what they're doing is phrasing your experience and helping you figure out what to put on your resume so that when a human being, when an employer or a recruiter reads it, they will say, wow, this candidate is great. Let's pull them in for an interview. It is not so that an ATS program like Workday or Greenhouse will greenlight your resume and show it to the recruiter versus redlighting it and then hiding it or deleting it or automatically rejecting you. That is a key difference and is such a big issue right now because there's just so much money behind those kind of scams and unscrupulous products and services because so many people are desperate for a job in the market of mass layoffs.
Totally. And I mean, I see texts all the time, like scam text messages of like, hi, I'm a recruiter from Indeed, or, just tons of them that are, again, like you're saying, taking advantage of people in vulnerable positions who are desperate to get an interview or get a job. And it's a scary time to be a candidate. And I appreciate the breakdown and the reassurance as well, like about these systems, because like you said, they do tend to be perceived as this like bot or black box that has no, or whatever, that does all these like magical things, when in reality it's not like that at all.
Look, I think there are major issues, deep problems in the system of hiring and interviewing candidates. And I would say a lot of it's cultural, a lot of it's systematic or systemic. And it's very easy when you're part of this system and you're being victimized in a way, or you're seeing the brunt end of something that's very negative, which is being rejected after spending hours and investing all this time and energy and money into a process, to blame the closest interface that you face, which would be the ATS that's rejecting you within very impersonal email, or it's a recruiter sending you that email or telling you we're going with a different candidate. And I get it. There are definitely many bad actors in the recruiting space out there, but there are also very good ones as well. And it's an issue when we, as a whole, blame a single part of the system when the entire system is at fault here. So it's tough. And I get it, but I would say, this is probably a bad analogy because debt collectors, I do feel very negative about them, but one can argue that there are probably deeper issues than the people who are working a debt collection agency, because oftentimes they're forced into it because that's the only job they can get. And we have major issues with, credit cards and how we structure debt in the United States and how we push people into taking out loans to survive. And there are these deep-rooted issues that are creating these horrible circumstances. But to me, it feels a little bit myopic or short-sighted to only blame the debt collectors who are calling you.
I think that's a really fair point too. And I know in the past you've been on the record too, but criticizing employers, for example, for really lengthy take-home exercises that require hours of essentially unpaid labor. And I mean, there have also been like cases that I've heard of where someone did do these exercises of unpaid labor, never got hired, and essentially gave this company a marketing plan for free to, maybe launch a particular new product or whatever, whatever the project may be. But that is a really big problem, again, for people who are economically disadvantaged, really trying to get a job quickly and are kind of being forced through some hoops that, frankly, may be more of the burden of, say, the hiring managers and recruiters to kind of vet this sort of expertise. But like you're saying, the flip side of that too is, again, your design recruiters often aren't designers. And it does strike me as a really challenging cultural hurdle to overcome in some ways.
Yeah, I think it's just really interesting how the power dynamics has shifted in the last few years over and over again. So you'll notice that when the hiring spree happened in 2022, virtually all take-home design exercises disappeared overnight because recruiters couldn't get any candidate to progress in the process if they had a take-home design exercise. And what the take-home design exercise does is it shifts the labor of finding that match and finding the right candidate onto the candidate side. Because you're spending on average of 5, 10, 15, 20 hours, and they're spending maybe 10 minutes to look through it to decide if you're the right fit or not. Because that gives them extra information to make that decision, that better, higher level decision. And because the job market shifted, that labor went onto the recruiter side. So now in 2022, recruiters had to talk to more candidates, figure out if they were the right fit or not, put them through an interview process and kind of do a one-to-one match in terms of how much time each party or each side is spending on the interview process. And after the mass layoffs in the last 2 or 3 years, we're finding ourselves in a place again where as employees and candidates, we've lost a lot of institutional power. So now that labor is being shifted back onto us, where we now have to spend, I would say, a ratio of maybe 30-1. Like for each hour the hiring manager spends in evaluating us, we're spending probably 30 hours, maybe. Maybe that's a bit extreme, but definitely more than 10-1.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful way to look at it, although it is grim and kind of sad to think about if you're on the candidate side. You mentioned that this is a project you're doing now. You're actively applying, or rather working to transition your role from design recruiter to designer once again. And I know that when you announced this, there was a lot of skepticism at first. Like, is this just a troll experiment? Because your LinkedIn does tend to have a lot of hot takes and sarcasm. But from what I've read, this is a genuine career goal of yours. And this is something that you're now very transparent about as you're upskilling and sharing what you are doing to upskill to get proficient enough to qualify for these roles. So I just want to say I appreciate you for being that transparent, and it's certainly scary enough to be someone who's applying for a role, let alone publishing your entire journey. So yeah, could you share more about it? It's called Only Fangs, is that correct?
Yes. It's called Only Fangs.
Fangs, yes, just to clarify.
Fangs,
yeah, like Fang, the
yes.
company, series of very prominent and very, I guess, top tier design firms, tech companies. So
yes, so Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. Mm-hmm. Not the other
company that
yes.
sounds similar.
Yes.
But very smart choice in URL there, because memorable. We'll say that.
Thank you. I actually didn't come up with it. Damien Martone, who runs Hatch Conference in Berlin, came up with it because I called it Only Hang a while back.
Oh.
And he's like, why don't you call it Only Fangs? I'm like, well, yeah, that's a much better name. So thank you, Damien. It's a little bit different than what most people might assume. It's not just me trying to find a design job, but I'm giving myself a very ambitious goal of landing a top tier design job in 6 months. I'll be working 12-hour days, 6 days a week, trying to upskill and reskill and making everything available to readers and the audience, all of it for free. So I'll be interviewing and talking about what I've learned in the interview, the mistakes I made. When I get rejected from a company, I'll be talking about it, why I believe I was rejected, what kind of feedback they gave, and how I can learn and improve from that. Same with constructing my portfolio. And it's going to be really interesting because I think I'm pretty sure I'm the only experienced designer at the leader staff level who did design recruiting for a few years before transitioning back into design. I think my greatest value proposition is that I can think on both sides, and I can like see the mistakes I'm making as I'm making them and hopefully change it, because the hiring process is so opaque. When we get rejected, 9 times out of 10, we don't get any feedback at all. And when we do, it's often very cookie cutter. It's very rare when they give us something that is actionable, that we can take to the next experience. So I'm hoping to provide a lot more information, a lot more details for people so that they can have a leg up in the interview process. The other questions I want to answer is, if you work really hard for 6 months, can you change your career trajectory? Because I'm pretty sure right now, if I were to interview for a role, having not done any design for 3 years and being so rusty, not understanding what variables are, or any of the new features and tools out there, can I conceivably land a top tier role at a company like Airbnb, Apple, or Notion, etc.? And it'll be fun and challenging. I'll probably get rejected a whole ton, and I'll make that fun and entertaining for people to watch. So a lot of Schadenfreude, whatever it's called, out there, hopefully. And I think the other thing I want to answer a bit is it an advantage or a disadvantage having a LinkedIn presence and audience at the level that I'm at currently? Because the often given advice by coaches and experienced designers out there is you need to network, you need to build relationships with people, and you need to get yourself out there, be known, create content, etc. Now, I think that advice is great. Everybody should do it, but I've taken it to a different level. I've invested thousands of hours in this. I've done this for 3+ years now, and I wouldn't say I'm like, I would say it's completely different at this point, right? It's a difference between telling somebody you should learn how to make a home cooked meal so you can feed your family a healthy, inexpensive, meal every single day. And I think that is sound advice for everyone. And the other advice is you should open up multiple McDonald's franchises as a business. And both advice will feed people, but it does so in very different ways. And the expertise and skills required will be very different. Like you're no longer cooking when you're opening up additional McDonald's. So I feel like I'm on the McDonald's side a little bit more, and it becomes a disadvantage in many ways. But it's, we'll see, because I know the vast majority of design content creators on LinkedIn, and I can't think of a single one who's parlayed that into a FAANG level job. They've either already worked at a high, at a very good design company to begin with, before they created content and built that audience, or they are working at, not a FAANG. So the question then becomes, can I do this? Because a lot of hiring managers are not okay with hiring somebody who has that kind of presence or audience on LinkedIn for many reasons. One would be reputational risk. It could be that they're worried about, are they going to be working hard, or are they going to be spending all their time and energy creating content on LinkedIn versus doing the job that we're paying them to do? So a lot of content creator friends are telling me that, well, when I got this job, they really weren't happy with my LinkedIn. They were telling me to either shut it down or, lower the frequency. And it definitely has an impact on people's ability to land a job and to keep it. So I'm curious how that's going to turn out.
I am as well. And, thank you in advance for sharing and publicizing what will be probably a very challenging journey for you, because as you said, you are committing quite a few hours every day for six days a week. And I think some people have compared it to like watching reality TV in some ways, where it's like we're feeling like we're watching the Truman Show in some ways. But I am excited to learn what you learn as well. So the website is Only Fangs. Again, that's FAANGS.com. Is that correct? Or is there a different?
.design. So Only Fangs.
Okay. OnlyFAANGs.design.
Only FAANGS.design. And I'll be starting this in September 1st. So that's about less than 2 weeks from this recording time. And by the time this comes out, I will be in the midst of it. So wish me luck. This is one of those grueling things that I put myself under for no good reason at all. I am not going to enjoy it. So it'll be fun, I think, for other people, not for me.
Well, best of luck to you, and we're excited to learn what you learn. So Hang, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your candid thoughts, for peeling the curtain back on what I think has been a really mysterious process for a lot of people. And while the market may be challenging right now, I think you've given people a lot of reassurance that we have more control than we think, especially around things like telling our story, building a resume that ultimately will get seen by people. So I hope the same goes for you, and that you're able to capture that FAANG job very soon.
Thank you, Therese. I hope so as well. It would be really sad if I spent 6 months of my life and got nowhere. But
I have faith in you, Hang. I have faith. That was Hang Zhu. If you're curious to follow along his journey to land that top design role in 6 months, you can check out his website, OnlyFAANGs.design. That's only FAANGS.design. There, he'll be sharing regular updates, interview takeaways, and portfolio insights as he attempts to land this job. You can also find his no-nonsense takes and career tips on LinkedIn. Just look for Hang, H-A-N-G, Zoo, X-U, and you'll find everything he has to say about hiring, burnout, and the design industry at large. And finally, if you're navigating a UX career pivot yourself or just trying to make sense of what's next, don't forget that we have live online courses, thousands of free resources, all on our website, nngroup.com. That's nngroup.com. And while you're there, go ahead and subscribe to our weekly email newsletter. That's it for today's show. Until next time, remember, keep it simple.